All right, so we're live on YouTube and on X. For the people joining us, feel free to interact in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. If you could also like the video, share it, and of course, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. That will definitely help us. Dimitri, I feel like last week we were at 75,000 subscribers. Now it's like 88, 89. So seems like there's a lot of visibility to our channel lately. And your Cyprus report randomly was like brought back into the algorithm. It feels like more and more people are talking about Israel's investments in Cyprus. I saw like a lot of memes and reels and videos about what Israel is doing in Cyprus, buying all the property, and it's just insane that like around a year ago, right around this time, well maybe not a year, like 6-7 months ago, you were there showing the secret hotels that the Israelis were operating. What kind of reports did we publish this week, Dimitri?
Well, before we do that, let's just say hello to a few people. Jawad Minhas, thank you for wishing us a speedy arrival at the 100,000 subscriber threshold. Our goal was to achieve that by the end of 2025, and looks like we're going to get there well before the end of the summer. So what do you think, Rami? Should we be shooting for 200,000 by the end of the year, or is that too ambitious? So,
maybe why not?
But we're very happy with the growth of Reason to Resist, and we really can't thank all of you enough for your support. Even just showing up, participating in the discussions, liking our videos, subscribing is very helpful. And to those of you who've actually donated your hard-earned money, we can't thank you enough. This was never intended to be a profit-making enterprise. Our goal is to make enough money to be able to sustain the operation on a break-even basis, and to expand our staffing, and be able to compensate people fairly for working for Reason to Resist. The more resources we have, the more important news we can cover, and the more analysis we can do and investigation we can do. So that's the goal of our of this project. It is not to enrich ourselves. So also want to say hello to others who've given us a shout out in the chat. Shrinka, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name, from Zagreb. Welcome. Verena Fraser, I believe if we've seen you on a number of other occasions. You're coming to us from the GTA, not far from where I am today. Hello, Natalie. Mineski from BC, British Columbia. Thank you for joining us again. And then Nadim from Florianópolis. I'm embarrassed to say I'm not quite sure where that is, Florianópolis. Is that Brazil by any chance? I'm not sure. Do you know, Rami, where Florianópolis is?
I have no idea. Let me Google it. Oh, it's in Brazil. Yeah.
It's in Brazil. Oh, wow. That's a very Greek name, by the way. Chris Jass from Eugene, Oregon. I think we've seen you before, Chris. Thank you for joining us. PPPP from the Netherlands. And, oh, I did get Trinka correct. Thank you. Natalie, no, I'm not in Toronto, but I'm not far from Toronto visiting a family member I haven't seen in some time. And we have Ramin Gritz from the Netherlands. So your question, Rami, well, first of all, let me just comment on that video about it's called I think it's called Israelis flooding into Cyprus to bind up everything in sight. And it was about, I think, 7-8 months ago that I did that. It was an investigative report in which I was driving around southern Cyprus, going to places that were not widely advertised, but that local sources had told me were basically harboring Israelis who had fled the genocidal entity. These were not people, as far as I could tell, at least not the majority of them, who had left Israel because they were disenchanted with the abominable human rights record of its government and military, but rather they just wanted a more quiet, peaceful life. And were using Cyprus, many of them, as kind of a second home, a place they could flee to when things got a bit too hairy in the genocidal entity. So that report actually got quite a bit of views, and then all of a sudden, I don't know, a few weeks ago, a lot of people started watching it. We were getting flooded with commentary from it, and I think that might have been precipitated by some local politicians in Greece expressing alarm at how much land Israelis were buying up and how this was making, not only changing sort of the culture of the island, but also and the politics of the island, but in particular was driving the cost of real estate up and making it unaffordable to a lot of Greek Cypriots. Needless to say, those Israelis are not, well, as far as I know, they're not flooding into the Turkish-occupied part of the island. They're in the southern coast, which is closest to Israel and which is under the control of the Greek Cypriot population. In any case, before we get into it, we're going to cover two subjects today: the so-called normalization between the terrorist regime in Syria and the terrorist regime in Israel. It's odd to use the word normalization when you talk about,
terrorist regimes.
Between two terrorist regimes. There's nothing normal about that. In any case, Rami is going to lead the discussion about that, and then we're going to move on to the IAEA and just an extraordinary developments regarding the IAEA over the last few weeks. And before we do that, I think you have a little story to tell us about your.
I completely forgot, but so on one of the last couple of live streams, when I was still in Latvia, I became friends with this community center called Maisnica, and the community center. I mean, I became kind of friends with them. They were critical of Russia, of course, but we were still able to get along on Palestine. There was a early building up Palestinian organizing committee that was being formed, and I was trying to push them to go a bit further, right, in what they were doing, and they kept telling me that the landscape here in Latvia is different and there's a lot of pressure, right? I kind of lost touch with them over time, obviously, because I was in China and now in Canada. But today on Instagram, I saw the stories of one of the comrades there. His name is Vladislav, and it turns out that Vladislav was deported from Latvia with really no notice. The same day that accusations were put up against him of being, I believe, a threat to state security, he was forced to pack his bags and flee. I'm not quite sure where he is right now. I just was able to be on the phone with him today for 30 minutes or so, where he explained me the whole situation. And that just shows, how the Eastern Europe is trying so hard to paint Russia as this oppressive society where freedom of speech is not allowed. And this guy was just deported for whispering Free Palestine and being part of a community, like a small community center that was organizing on really just local rights and on Palestine. And the reason why I found this story quite interesting is because he sent me the press release that he's been sharing with media. And it turns out that someone confessed to having been hired by VTT, which is the, let's say, the secret services, the state police, let's just say, of Latvia. And he confessed to being paid to spy on behalf of the secret services and to infiltrate this community center, Maisnica, and to document what they were doing. And I mean, I'm fairly familiar with them, and they've really done nothing that would be seen as against the law. But just to see the extent of which the state is ready to go to crack down on pro-Palestinian voices, and to hire people to infiltrate is quite drastic. And I'll be interviewing him right after his appeal is completed, whether it's positive or negative. Next week, I'll be interviewing him to document the story, because I find it completely shocking. Truly, the more he was telling me the story, I was like, really, in Latvia, right? This is
this country is constantly lecturing Russia about suppressing dissent and about aggression and so forth. And there it is, suppressing criticism of a genocidal regime.
Absurd.
Absurd. Such is the state of European politics today, my friend. Welcome to the land of egregious hypocrisy. So with that little anecdote to get us off, you want to tell us about the so-called normalization between the two terrorist regimes of Israel and Syria?
Yeah. Well, on the 26th of June, Witkoff announced that new countries would be expanding into the so-called Abraham Accords. And he also hinted that it would be countries we would have never anticipated or expected it to be, right? So there was this article over here in, I think this was Jerusalem Post, I'm not sure, but it says, countries not previously contemplated will soon join the Abraham Accords. Now, Dimitri, we've been following the news for quite some time. We have a relatively good understanding of the Middle East. And just the way he frames it as countries would have never expected, it seems to be a sly way of mentioning countries that have been historically hostile to Israel. And as our audience is probably familiar, many countries have previously normalized with Israel.
So it's not that many, right? It's basically the United Arab Emirates,
Bahrain,
Morocco,
Sudan, but also then there are countries like Qatar that have de facto normalized with Israel. I mean, since 1996, there's an Israeli trade office operating out of Doha. Qatar has invested in a Doha stadium in Sakhneen, 1948 Palestine, so-called Israel. And I mean, and I think, I don't know if we mentioned Egypt, but definitely Egypt and Jordan, which are not really part of the Abraham Accords, but they still normalize with Israel. And even before normalizing with Israel, countries like the United Arab Emirates have assisted Israel in being some sort of proxy state for them. As ironic as this might sound, you look at in 2010, the UAE facilitated the assassination of Hamas members who were staying in a hotel there. The UAE, right after 2007, when Dahlan was kicked out of Gaza after the loss of Fatah in the Battle of Gaza, he ended up finding refuge in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, where Mohammed Dahlan became a close security advisor and political advisor to the now King MBZ. Now, these hostile countries that would have possibly normalized with Israel at this point, that kind of leaves us with Syria or Lebanon. Now, would Lebanon normalize with Israel? Well, they did put in place a new president, and that president is, I mean, there are billboards across Beirut saying "Make Lebanon great again," right? He's playing the whole Trump card, but I think it's probably too early, probably a bit too early for that. Well, mainly because, I mean, Lebanon has a huge Palestinian refugee population. You have Hezbollah, and even beyond Hezbollah, really, like the average Lebanese person is definitely anti-Israel. I mean, even the not the Shiites. I don't know how to say this in a non-sectarian way, but truly, I wouldn't really envision Lebanon today, at least not before the Americans complete their U.S. embassy that they're building in Beirut, the largest embassy in the world, which is probably a code word for a military base. Because you would need to crack down on the population and kind of impose a reality on the ground. So that kind of pushes now to Syria. And with Syria, after the collapse of the Syrian Arab Republic, of the leadership of Bashar al-Assad, Jolani was kind of parachuted into power. And I mean, he's been obviously weaponized and, sorry, not weaponized, but armed and given weapons from the United States and Israel. There were reports of groups being cured in Israel or treated in Israeli hospitals who were from the Syrian civil war. So these ties between Jolani and his henchmen are deeply rooted with Israel, the United States, and Europe that have been backing them for so long. And Jolani coming into Syria, I mean, this guy doesn't have a mandate given by the Syrian people. He was just parachuted there, a bit like how El-Sisi came into power after the fall of the Morsi government in Egypt. They kind of crack down on opposition. They come in as interim leaders, make sure that there's no one that could threaten their leadership, and then put themselves as eternal leaders of these countries. So I don't know why Witkoff says that this would come as a shock, right? Since we kind of always saw it coming. I mean, initially for the first few days, first few weeks, first few months of the Syrian civil war, I kind of came in a bit I mean, I still had hope of this Arab Spring, of a new Arab world that would be possible, but we quickly realized that the Arab Spring was a way to push in kind of these Zionist regimes over the Middle East, and then we saw it over the years. And now it makes a lot of sense that just weeks or months after the collapse of Syria, Syria is now hinting towards normalization with Israel. Now, the way we kind of see these normalizations being brought to the table is that they kind of give us a little hint before doing it, right? So when the Abraham Accords first started coming out, there were reports coming in that the United Arab Emirates, that Bahrain would normalize with Israel, before they actually did it, just to test the waters and see how people react. Now, a country like the Emirates, which is a police state, which, I mean, not much freedoms going on there, maybe it's easier over there to push, to impose a reality of recognizing Israel. And so is the case for Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan at that point. I think it was a bit in a similar situation as Syria. If you go on Google News right now, you type in Syria normalization, you'll see an article being published every other week. And there was one article in particular that really stood out for me, which was this one, published in the Times of Israel, that says, I don't know if we could see it too well, but countries, is that the one? Oh, sorry. We need to remove this one. Syrian state media says premature to discuss peace deal with Israel. And if you look down on this article, it says it is not possible to talk about the possibility of negotiations over a new agreement unless the occupation fully adheres to the 1974 disengagement agreement and withdraws from the areas it has penetrated. Now, they're not referring to the Syrian Golan Heights that Israel unilaterally annexed in 1967 and that occupied since 1967. They're referring to the 1974 armistice that Israel broke the day after Bashar al-Assad left Syria. The Netanyahu voided this agreement and then went on the offensive, starting by taking over Mount Hermon, which is described as being the eyes of Israel. Mount Hermon is where Iraq and Iran were sending drones, and due to the high nature of the mountain, it would reduce the time of reaction for Israel to shoot down these drones. So it was a strategic importance that Israel took. And then they went deeper into the south of Syria, almost towards 30 kilometers south of Damascus. Now, for the Syrian state media to quote, to mention that it's not possible for Syria to normalize with Israel as long as Israel doesn't go back to 1974 disengagement agreement, is a way of, it's basically giving normalization with Israel for free. These are lands that were taken by Israel weeks ago, and they're saying that this is a condition to go back to any form of peace agreement. So it kind of shows the collusion happening between Syria, Israel, and the United States. Just this week, Trump removed Jolani from these terror watch lists, these sanctions lists, and it's hard to see how it's not for some back channel favors. In this case, being normalization with Israel. So this is, I mean, it's truly sad to see the state of the Middle East, at least for the case of Syria. Now, I mean, we always saw Jolani as opponents of Palestine, opponents of the greater good of Syrian self-determination. But what annoys me, Dimitri, is that the Syrian population has been extremely quiet, especially the ones that advocated for the collapse of Bashar al-Assad and for the collapse of Syria. I mean, now is the time for these people to speak out and come to defense of Palestine. We're not going to wait until it's too late and they actually recognize Israel before complaining. And we know that once Israel normalizes with countries, they deeply embed themselves into that country, whether it is through drastically increased trade ties, security cooperation, military cooperation, and also controlling of strategic resources. We know that Israel wants to control the Litani River because that river is an important water source for Lebanon. And similar in Syria, Israel wants to control the water access for Syria and use it as leverage to ensure that Syria will be submissive to Israel for the longer run. So, I mean, I'm just disappointed not in Jolani, since we never had any hope in him, but in the Syrian people who are seeing normalization happening in front of their eyes and that have been drastically quiet. I mean, I haven't heard anyone who opposed Bashar al-Assad right now speak out against Jolani and recognize the threat he is to Syria and the threat he is to Palestine. So I think I expect a lot more from the Syrian people, and it's just really sad how just the day after the civil war, after Bashar is gone, everyone is now no longer ready to die for their principles, and no one's ready to speak out. They claim to have done a revolution to fight for freedom. Where's their freedom if they're imposed normalization agreement with Israel against their will? So, yeah.
So I think that Jolani has a real problem, to put it mildly, in terms of trying to strike any kind of normalization deal, and that is the Golan Heights, which Israel occupied in the 1967 war and subsequently began to settle in violation of international law. And now there are tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Israeli colonists living there illegally, and they purported to annex it and make it part of Israel. I think it was back in the 1980s. Trump, in this first administration, recognized Israel's illegal annexation of the Golan Heights, but up until that point in time, even the United States, along with virtually the entire international community, recognized the illegality of the annexation. And there's an article, an interesting article that was published by TRT World 7 months ago. It's titled "Explaining the Importance of Golan Heights and Why Israel Seeks to Control It." And it says that it talks about Israel expanding plan as settlements in the Golan Heights, and goes on to explain that this is an area of immense military value. And this is what the article has to say. The strategic area overlooks 4 countries: Syria, Israel, Lebanon, and Jordan, and is considered a vantage military position in a strife-torn region. The Israeli government has set aside more than 11 million to encourage demographic growth there. Tel Aviv considers the Golan Heights a crucial asset for Israel's national security. That's because the strategically significant plateau gives Israel a military advantage over the 3 neighboring countries. And I can tell you from repeated visits to South Lebanon, just sitting there in the south of Lebanon, you can see the Golan Heights. It does indeed offer vitally important military advantages to whoever occupies it, and it is under international law, Syrian territory. So there's zero prospect of Israel giving this up voluntarily. I can't imagine. The only way that's going to be recovered is by some kind of crushing sanctions regime being imposed upon the genocidal entity or military force. Short of that, they aren't going to give it up ever. And so how's Jolani going to normalize? How can he go to the Syrian people, especially those who came from the Golan Heights and were expelled from the area, claimed to be the legitimate leader of Syria and acting in its national interests, when he normalizes with a state that has stolen a vitally important part of the country and uses it to threaten the security of the Syrian people? And now, of course, since Jolani seized power, Israel has come even further, even deeper into Syria and taking even more territory. I would be shocked if they'd give up any part of that territory. So how's he going to do this? How is he going to normalize? And this is why I think he's saying it's premature. He's putting it off indefinitely because I think he understands perfectly well that to normalize, he's going to have to basically acquiesce in the theft of this vitally important land from Syria. Can't imagine how he's going to pull that rabbit out of a hat, but what do I know? Many people would have said that he had no prospect of being the leader of Syria, so he managed to pull that one off. Maybe he'll magically find a way to normalize without revealing his true colors, and that he's just an agent of Washington. So, did you have anything else to add, Rami, before we move on to the international atomic energy farce?
No, I think we're good to go straight into the collaboration between some UN agency and the war in Iran.
So yesterday, Iran's president signed a law which, according to Iranian state media, suspended cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA. And if you could pull up image number 1, Rami, this is a tweet that was put out by Iran's foreign ministry yesterday. If you look at the bottom, he's commenting on a post on X from the German foreign ministry, in which it said, following the adoption of this law in Iran, which suspended cooperation, it said, Iran's decision to suspend cooperation with the IAEA sends a devastating message. It eliminates any possibility of international oversight of the Iranian nuclear program, which is crucial for a diplomatic solution. Iran must reverse this decision. And so the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, he writes, fake news. Iran remains committed to the NPT and its safeguards agreement. In accordance with the new legislation by Majlis, sparked by the unlawful attacks against our nuclear facilities by Israel and the U.S., our cooperation with IAEA will be channeled through Iran's Supreme National Security Council for obvious safety and security reasons. Now, just pausing there, the Iranian state media did appear to say that this was a suspension of cooperation with the IAEA. So it's kind of hard to reconcile what he's saying there with what the state media said. But I think what the message is that Iran is not yet going to withdraw from the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And if its trust in the organization can be restored at some point in the future, perhaps it will allow some level of inspections to take place of its nuclear facilities. But for the time being, it has lost trust. And although it remains formally within the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, it is going to be very, very circumspect about allowing IAEA officials to inspect its facilities for the time being. So what I found particularly entertaining about this response from the Iranian foreign ministry is it goes on to say, reality to Iranians, what truly sends a devastating message and destroys a diplomatic solution is very obvious. First, Germany's explicit support for Israel's unlawful attack on Iran, including safeguarded nuclear sites, as dirty work carried out on behalf of the West. Absolutely true. Israel attacked Iran on behalf of the West, not just on its own behalf. And then he says Germany also shamefully supported the unlawful U.S. attack against Iranian nuclear facilities, which violated international law. That is absolutely true. It did violate international law and was supported by Germany, also violated the NPT and the UN Charter. Third, Germany's repudiation of the JCPOA, that is the Obama-era nuclear deal, which Trump tore up in his first administration, by openly demanding zero enrichment in Iran. And finally, he says, Iranians were already put off by Germany's Nazi-style backing of genocide in Gaza and its support for Saddam's war in Iran by providing materials for chemical weapons. All of that is true. So who the hell is, Chancellor BlackRock of Germany to criticize the Iranians for suspending the cooperation with this corrupted and co-opted Western puppet agency, the IAEA. So we can take that off the screen, Rami. Now, tensions between Iran and the IAEA have been building for years. Matters reached a boiling point when the IAEA board adopted a resolution condemning Iran on June 12th. That was the last day of the 60-day deadline that the war criminal Donald Trump had unilaterally imposed on Iran for completing a nuclear deal that was acceptable to the Trump regime. June 12th was also the day before Israel launched its criminal and failed war of aggression on Iran. So, everybody knew that Israel was preparing to attack Iran on June 12th. On June 12th, everybody knew it was preparing. No one knew exactly, well, no one outside the Israeli and U.S. governments knew exactly when that was going to happen. But the fact that Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, would push this resolution through on the last day of the 60-day deadline that Trump had imposed unilaterally, and at a time when Israel was preparing to attack Iran, the timing of this stunk to high heaven, and it should have been obvious to everybody on the IAEA board that they should have all smelled a rat. Now, before I go further on that point, let's take a closer look at the June 12th resolution. So this would be image 2, Rami. If we can scroll through it, we'll see at the very top there, they start out the Board of Governors. There are 35 states represented on the IAEA Board of Governors. They start by, stroking the ego of Rafael Grossi, commending the continued professional, independent, and impartial efforts of the IAEA Director General, including its inspectors, to implement Iran's NPT Safeguards Agreement, emphasizing the essential and independent role of the IAEA in verifying Iran's compliance with its NPT safeguard obligations. You can judge for yourselves when you're finished whether the IAEA has been truly independent and impartial. And then we go down. So that's the preamble. And then on the second page, in the top half, this is the first part of the resolution. The agency deeply regrets that despite repeated calls from the board and many opportunities offered, Iran has failed to cooperate fully with the agency as required by its safeguard agreement. And then down at the bottom of that page, this is clause 7, reaffirms its decision that it is essential and urgent in order to ensure verification of the non-diversion of nuclear material that Iran act to fulfill its legal obligations, and with a view to clarifying all outstanding safeguards issues, take the following actions without delay. 1, provide technically credible explanation for the presence of uranium particles of anthropogenic origin in 2 undeclared locations in Iran. I'm going to explain what this means in a moment. 2, inform the agency of the current locations of the nuclear material and/or of the contaminated equipment. 3, provide all information, documentation, and answers the agency requires for that purpose. So what is that all about? Well, before I tell you, let's just, I will tell you, I was going to talk to you about the voting around this resolution, but first I'll tell you what this is all about. And it's explained very clearly and helpfully by Medea Benjamin and Nicholas Davies in a June 23rd article published by Common Dreams. And I'm quoting from their article. The source of the IAEA investigation that led to this resolution was a 2018 Israeli intelligence report that its agents had identified 3 previously undisclosed sites in Iran where Iran had conducted uranium enrichment prior to 2003. Prior to 2000, more than 20 years ago. In 2019, Grossi opened an investigation. So even though it's related to events prior to 2003, Grossi learns about it from the Israelis in 2019. He opens an investigation. The IAEA eventually did gain access to the sites and detected traces of enriched uranium. So the Iranians let them go there. They detect traces of enriched uranium. And the article goes on by Medea Benjamin, Nicholas Davies, and says, despite the fateful consequences of his actions, Grossi has never explained publicly how the IAEA can be sure that Israel's Mossad intelligence agency or its Iranian collaborators, such as the MEK, did not put the enriched uranium in those sites themselves, as Iranian officials have suggested. Okay, so this just raises so many questions. First of all, why does Grossi trust so-called intelligence provided by the Mossad? This is a state that refuses to expose its own nuclear facilities and nuclear weapons to international inspection. It's the only state in West Asia not to be a member of the NPT. It is a serial human rights abuser, a serial violator of international law, and has demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that it will spread any falsehood in order to justify the destruction of Iran. So why is he dealing with the Mossad, and why is he trusting these people, Grossi? And secondly, why is he rehashing now, on this day, the 60th day, the last day of the period unilaterally imposed by Trump for a nuclear deal that's acceptable to him, allegations that relate to sites that were used prior to 2003, okay? They learned about them, the IAEA, from the Mossad in 2018, but the sites themselves were allegedly being used over 20 years ago. And since then, the Western intelligence agencies, including the US intelligence agencies, consistently said that Iran is not trying to develop a nuclear arsenal, despite its possession of enriched uranium. So I think the answer is obvious. The IAEA chose to, at Grossi's insistence, promulgate this resolution on this date in order to set the stage for an Israeli attack on Iran and provide some kind of, moral or legal justification for this criminal act. You can hardly imagine a less impartial, a less independent regulatory agency than that. So let's talk briefly about the voting around this resolution. Of the 35 countries represented on the IAEA's board, only 19 voted for it, 3 voted against, and 11 abstained. 2 did not vote at all. The United States contacted 8 board member governments on June 10th to persuade them to either vote for the resolution or not to vote. So there was a lot of arm twisting going on. The 19 states that voted in favor of the resolution are overwhelmingly states that serve as vassals of Washington. They include Japan, Canada, South Korea, Australia, Argentina, Ecuador, Morocco, Spain, France, the UK, Germany, Netherlands, Italy, Ukraine, Belgium, and Luxembourg. All vassals of Washington. Russia, China, and Burkina Faso voted against the resolution. The 11 states that abstained come from the Global South: Thailand, India, Pakistan, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, Ghana, Brazil, Armenia, and Bangladesh. Apparently, those 11 states failed to appreciate, despite its highly suspicious timing, that this resolution was designed to set the stage for an illegal Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. And frankly, I find that difficult to understand. How could they have not smelled the rat? It was so obvious what was going on here from the very beginning. Now, predictably, the IAEA's June 12th resolution unleashed a deluge of alarmist reports by the Western corporate media. If you could pull up, I'm just going to show you one of many examples. This is a Reuters report. IAEA board declares Iran in breach of non-proliferation obligations. Okay, the headline doesn't convey that what the IAEA was doing was dredging up allegations that came from the Mossad and that related to nuclear sites that had allegedly been used for uranium enrichment prior to 2003. Okay, and you said these headlines like this, misleading, uninformative headlines, were plastered all over the Western corporate media on June 12th. And the next day, Israel launches its criminal war of aggression and, in violation of international law, bombs Iran's nuclear facilities. So you can imagine that at that stage, the Iranian government has had quite enough of the IAEA. And to compound matters, after Israel attacked Iran's nuclear facilities on June 13th, the IAEA on that very day issued a meek statement which worsened relations between Iran and the agency even more. It did not explicitly condemn Israel's attacks, and it used language that was less harsh than the language of the IAEA board resolution on June 12th. So here is the Rafael Grossi statement of June 13th. This is image number 4, Rami. And you'll see what he says there. This development, namely the bombing of of Iran's nuclear facilities, an egregious and dangerous violation of international law because of the contamination this can cause. These are protected sites in international law. There is no conceivable argument that this was legal. And what does he have to say about it? He says he finds this deeply concerning. That's the most condemnation that Rafael Grossi could muster on that day. So since the IAEA board adopted that resolution, more damning revelations have emerged about the head of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, and the agency's collusion with the Trump and Netanyahu regimes. One of the journalists who has brought more damning information to light is Kit Klarenberg. He's an investigative journalist exploring the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. He writes frequently for The Gray Zone and other important alternative media outlets. Earlier today, I interviewed Kit about the new information he has brought to light. We're going to publish Kit's interview in the morning. In the meantime, I commend to you the two articles he's authored in the past few days. The first was published by The Gray Zone on July 1st. You can see it there. Spying on Iran, How MI6 Infiltrated the IAEA. And there, Kit talks about a previously undisclosed document which was leaked, which shows that a character by the name of Nicholas Langman, an MI6 agent with an extraordinarily unsavory background, was working hard to influence the IAEA's policies and practices with respect to Iran at a critical moment in the relationship between the two. But I'm not going to get into the details of that now. You can read the article and watch our interview of Kit tomorrow. It was most informative. The second article Kit authored this week was published by The Cradle on July 2nd, yesterday. And this one is about Mosaic, a program developed by a really shady company called Palantir, which is complicit 6 ways from Sunday and, various human rights abuses by both Israel and the United States government. Again, I commend that article to you, and we'll get into how the IAEA has been using this predictive technology, or supposedly predictive technology, to do its dirty work. So the last thing I want to say about all of this, because it's not discussed often enough, just sort of what is the NNPT all about? It's important to understand that because it is now at serious risk, to be perfectly blunt about it. We are at a place, because of the agency having become so discredited, because it's obvious co-option by Western governments, it's quite possibly providing to Israel the identities of nuclear scientists in Iran who were murdered, some of them along with their families. The entire non-proliferation regime that was set up in 1968 pursuant to this treaty is at risk of collapse, very serious risk of collapse. And if there ever was a case of blowback, this is it. You could suddenly, because if this regulatory regime, this regime of oversight of the nuclear operations of countries around the world, if it collapses and there is no independent examination or inspection going on of nuclear facilities around the world, that is going to dramatically increase the risk of the proliferation of nuclear weapons, which is presumably something that the U.S. government and Israel do not want. So their depravity and their corruption of this agency could end up, in a massive own goal, where their own security interests are profoundly compromised by their own subterfuge. So the NNPT, as I mentioned, was adopted in 1968, only a few years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and less than 25 years after the U.S. committed one of the worst atrocities in human history by nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki and knowingly incinerating tens of thousands of Japanese children. That's what it did when it attacked those two cities. It knew exactly that it was going to murder tens of thousands of innocent children. And it did it anyways at a time when it was not militarily necessary for the United States to destroy these cities in order to secure the surrender of Japan. The NNPT is remarkably brief. It consists of only 11 articles. I would like to show you what I would consider to be the heart and soul of the NNPT. So these are articles 4, 5, and 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So first of all, let's take a look at Article 4. Article 4 says, nothing in this treaty shall be, this is Clause 1 of Article 4, shall be interpreted as affecting the inalienable right of all parties to the treaty to develop, research, production, and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without discrimination and in conformity with Articles 1 and 2 of this treaty. So the first thing to understand is that Iran, by signing on to this treaty as it did, and as I mentioned, Israel has not done that, was not surrendering the right to develop and use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. It has the inalienable right, as do all states, and no one has the authority to deprive it of that right. The Trump administration was demanding that Iran give up its nuclear energy program altogether, not just that it give up enrichment, but that it give up its nuclear energy program. Where did the Trump administration get off telling, a sovereign nation that it had to give up something to which it is entitled under international law? And Trump says, oh, they have a lot of oil. That's completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter that they have a lot of oil. All countries, regardless of how many other energy sources they have at their disposal, have the right to nuclear energy. It's not just an energy source. It also is important for medical research and a host of other peaceful applications. And by the way, the United States is one of the biggest oil producers in the world. Does that mean the United States is not entitled to have nuclear energy? I don't think that's the reasoning of the U.S. government. And there are other states that have nuclear energy and that have large resources. I mean, the Russian Federation has gigantic fossil fuel reserves and obviously employs, both for peaceful and military purposes, nuclear energy. So the second thing is, under this treaty, there's nothing in this treaty that bars the enrichment of uranium. In fact, in order to have nuclear energy reactors for peaceful purposes, you have to have enriched uranium. The level of the composition of uranium occurring in nature is not sufficient to fuel a nuclear energy reactor. You have to enrich the uranium up to about a level of 5%. So if you have an inalienable right to nuclear energy, which you do under international law and NPT, then you also necessarily have the right to enriched uranium. Otherwise, you couldn't have a nuclear energy program. So again, there's absolutely no legal basis to the demand from Israel, the United States, and other Western states that Iran surrender its capacity to enrich uranium. Now, Article 5 says each party to the treaty undertakes to take appropriate measures to ensure that under appropriate international observation and through appropriate international procedures, potential benefits from any peaceful applications of nuclear explosions will be made available to non-nuclear weapon states to the treaty on a non-discriminatory basis. Critical words. So you can't say, that some countries get to use nuclear energy while others don't, because you don't like their politics or you don't like, their political stance towards something like a genocide in Palestine. And then this is a very important article, Article 6, which is not discussed nearly enough in the corporate media. Article 6 says each of the parties to the treaty undertakes to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. Now, several years ago, dozens of states entered into the nuclear weapons ban treaty. Not only did the United States and Israel refuse to sign on to that treaty, but they also strong-armed other countries that don't have nuclear weapons and don't want to develop nuclear weapons. For example, Canada, where Rami and I are currently situated, they got strong-armed by the United States not to sign on to that treaty because the United States didn't want to be pressured to do that itself. Now, this article, as I mentioned, Article 6, is part of a treaty that was adopted in 1968. Okay, that is 67 years ago. 67 years ago. How are we anywhere closer to nuclear disarmament today than we were then? In fact, the United States is going in the opposite direction. It started under the Bush administration when George W. withdrew the United States from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Then, of course, the Trump administration blew up the JCPOA between the U.S. government and Iran, even though Iran was complying with the deal, according to the IAEA. And then the Trump administration withdrew the United States from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was a bedrock of nuclear security in Europe, and did so over the objections, the strenuous objections of the Russian Federation. So the United States, in all of this time, in the decades that have passed since this treaty was entered into, has for over 20 years been undermining nuclear disarmament. And in fact, it's investing, I think under the Obama administration, the government committed to investing something like $1 trillion in the modernization of the US nuclear arsenal. So the bottom line is this: the United States is flagrantly violating Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and has been flagrantly violating it for over 20 years, if not much longer, and is in no position to condemn any other state for non-compliance, especially a state that does not have nuclear weapons, and that its own intelligence agencies, that U.S. intelligence agencies, say is not trying to develop nuclear weapons. So, I think that we're at a stage now where the vast majority of people in the world can see the grotesque hypocrisy of this. If anything, the United States and Israel have done us, at least in one respect, a favor, because they've brought this whole subject of nuclear weapons proliferation back into the discussion. But the primary focus of our discussion of that issue should be their non-compliance with the NNPT, their nuclear provocation, their nuclear saber rattling, the U.S.'s use of nuclear weapons in the Second World War, the only time that has ever been done in human history. That's where the focus should be put. It should not be put on states that don't have nuclear weapons and that clearly have not been trying to develop them. So where we now stand, my friends, is this entire regulatory regime has been thoroughly discredited. And as I say, we may be about to witness the collapse of the NNPT in the years ahead.
Dimitri, the Iranian nuclear program, I think it's a symbol of Iranian sovereignty. You cannot tell countries what they can and can't do. They can abide by international law, which is what Iran was doing. But Iran, at the end of the day, is guilty of one crime, and it's a crime of having its own independent foreign policy and standing up for the Palestinian people. Now that America attacked the Iranian nuclear facilities, I mean, it does seem like they're not that impacted. Iran will be able to build it back. But just the fact of building back, I see a lot of ties or similarities with what's going on in Palestine. They demolish our homes, we build them back. They attack Iran's nuclear facilities, Iran will build them back and keep operating it the way they want to operate it. Iran has pledged to use it for civilian purposes, for energy, for medical research, and they'll keep doing so for as long as they wish to do so. But what I find interesting here is that, I mean, we mentioned the IAEA working in cahoots with Israel and basically giving them a political reason to attack Iran. What other UN agencies or international agencies are also working in collaboration with Israel to push their goals? I mean, what stops us from believing that UNRWA is also not collaborating with Israel in Gaza or in the refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan? And then my other question, Dimitri, would be, well, if you're a country like China and Russia, and you know that all these Western-backed organizations are working for their own interests and they're all controlled by them, then do you think that there's an opportunity to create new organizations that will be much more fair and not being totally controlled by the West?
Well, in response to your first question, we know from some excellent reporting by independent journalists, including in particular Aaron Mate, that the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, put out, how shall I put this, fabricated, analysis in order to persuade the public that Bashar al-Assad's forces had launched a chemical attack in Syria. When whistleblowers came forward from that agency and said that they had been pressured to change their report to implicate the Assad government, they were, as I recall, fired. If you want to know the full history of that sort of affair, as I say, Aaron Mate has written very extensively and ably about it. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, in my discussion today with Kit Klarenberg, he was talking about how that organization was basically used by NATO to gather intelligence in Kosovo on the positions of Serbian forces, which was then used by NATO to bomb those forces. This is not unique to the IAEA, this corruption and co-option by Western governments, and particularly Washington, for their, sordid hegemonic purposes. And how we rectify this problem. I mean, I think, frankly, some of these organizations need to be dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. And a very important protection that we have to put in place is the funding of these organizations has to be ensured in ways that it's kind of like the problem you have with the corporate media. The corporate media are so corrupt and they lie so much because they're owned by and funded by billionaires. And so the billionaires use them as propaganda organs rather than as instruments to inform the public. So the same thing happens with these international organizations. A lot of the funding comes from Western governments, and they use the funding in order to corrupt them. And you also have to make sure you're hiring people who are of the highest integrity. You can't allow them to go work for the industries they regulate. The revolving door becomes a huge problem. So there are a number of measures I think would have to be put in place to ensure that these organizations in the future are committed to their mission and are not corrupted by any governments. But right now, Rami, I mean, it's almost as if the entire legal architecture set up in the post-World War II period is disintegrating before our very eyes. It's quite dangerous. So, yeah, and the last thing I want to say about this character Grossi is that apparently the West is promoting him to be the next UN Security, the next Secretary General of the United Nations, to replace Antonio Guterres. So if they proffer him as a candidate, I suggest you call up your local political representative and tell them that you want your government to oppose the selection of Rafael Grossi to become the next UN Secretary General.
I'm sure Canada will be the first to vote for him.
Exactly. Welcome to vassal land. So, yes, Maria, God help us. I agree. Okay, do you have anything else to add, Rami, or should we take some questions before we?
I think we should go straight into the questions. So we'll, folks, if you're in the chat here, feel free to drop in some questions. Make sure they're quite visible with question marks everywhere, so that I could see them appear in the chat and save them. Yeah, so we have Chief Wiggum in the chat earlier who said, Dimitri, I know you're a lawyer, but curse the West, international law and the UN, why should we follow that thing? I think there's a big sentiment here of people recognizing that these agencies have played us for so long. I mean, as Palestinians, we know very early on, back in 1948, that Israel legitimized the land theft of the theft of our land and the dispopulation of our land. So there's good reasons to be skeptical, of the United Nations and all of its satellite entities, and also we know how the West had the Middle East is also suffering under this whole thing called the enjoyification of the Middle East, where the NGOs are ensuring a status quo that is keeping us under the boot of the West. So, I mean, I do think that we need to maybe us in media should be talking a lot more about the role the UN is playing in legitimizing these wars, and spearhead a movement where we work towards a world order that is much more just and democratic. Maybe one where there's no special security councils where the United States could just veto anything they want. So we have a question here from Maria.
I just want to respond to, yeah, I get that comment a lot. Why even talk about international law, because it's been destroyed by the West, basically. Because I think it does affect public opinion, and the Western governments themselves will often try to dress up their actions as being compliant with international law. And I think we need to understand, what the legality of their behavior and the behavior of their declared enemies actually is, even if at the end of the day we know that the major powers, particularly in the West, are not going to comply with international law. It's still important to understand what international law says, and particularly to make sure that people out there are not being deceived by these bogus arguments that are being put forward about the legality or the illegality of a certain country's behavior. It still does influence, as far as I can tell, significantly global public opinion, questions of legality and illegality under international law.
We have
I want to say someone else in the comment, sorry to interrupt, Rami, made a comment about the Syrian Network for Human Rights having documented, I think it was about 231,000 deaths caused by Assad, his government, his forces. I'm not going to get into a discussion about how credible that organization is. I don't dispute that. At the end of the day, I don't dispute that the regime of Bashar al-Assad was dictatorial, that it committed severe human rights abuses. But by the same token, I don't think that has anything to do with the reason why he was overthrown. Number one, had nothing to do with human rights. Number two, what has replaced him, as far as I can tell, is worse than what was in power before. And number three, just because his government, his regime did commit severe human rights abuses, doesn't mean that everything the West says about him is true. We should be faithful to the evidence. And the evidence, as Aaron Mate has capably explained, does not support the OPCW's allegation that that his forces used chemical weapons. I believe it was in Duma, in a village called Duma, as I recall. So yeah, just because I'm disputing the veracity of the OPCW's investigation doesn't mean that I believe that the regime of Bashar al-Assad complied with human rights.
So there was this comment on the screen by Cisco Terrace, who says, "It's amazing how a tiny country can march around and take over land and claim it and kick out people living there." My little thought here is that, is it a tiny country if you put in perspective the fact that it's the United States, it's the neo-colonial world, right? It's the same way the British and the French colonized the entire world collectively together with the Dutch and the Belgians. And I think we cannot view Israel any different than just a proxy satellite state in the region doing America's work of keeping the Middle East divided. If it wasn't for Israel, truly the Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria would just be one country called Greater Syria. It's just a unified language, unified people with one culture. Many cultures, but still expressed in a we're all brothers in that part of the world. So Israel is playing the role of making sure that us Greater Syrians never have control over the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, and don't unite ourselves as being an economic powerhouse. The entire Arab world together, we would reach a population of 250 million people. It would be the most strategic alliance of nations or people, which would be able to lead in manufacturing and production of energy and holding nice resources. So I think there's deep interest for why Israel exists, and we need to decolonize ourselves and understand that we are greater Syrians, or we are, United Arabs. So that's just my little thought here. Then we had a question from, what's this? Someone asked.
Yes, Bob, I am Greek. I'm just responding to a question in the chat. I love Greek words.
Now we have this question by Peter S., who says, what does Dimitri think of the stories of Zionists buying up Cypriot land? Dimitri saw it coming long ago. We already spoke about this a bit earlier in this stream, but Dimitri, maybe you want to summarize that quickly?
Well, I think first and foremost, the government of Cyprus should adopt policies that ensure the affordability of land to the indigenous population of the island, and having people coming in who have no, cultural or linguistic or historical connection to this land, and who are there purely for purposes of, vacationing there or seeking sanctuary there when their genocidal homeland or state is, engaged in a war. I don't think that that's consistent with the interests of the Greek Cypriot population. So that's the first thing. They're driving up the cost of land for the people who live there. And it's already prohibitively expensive for a lot of Greek Cypriots. Secondly, as far as I can tell, most of the Israelis who are going to, based on all the research I did, and I did a fair bit, most of them are going there for reasons that have nothing to do with conscience. They're not leaving, Israel and going to Cyprus for some or all of their time because they have a moral objection to the sadistic, satanic behavior of their government. They're going there for selfish reasons, which is to say they want to get out of harm's way when the state is at war against a formidable ally. Or maybe they're going there just because they see lucrative business opportunities, or they just want to have like an insurance policy in case things go really off the rails in Israel. There's some place they can flee to and take up a new residence. My own view, I'm not a Cypriot. I'm a Greek citizen, but I'm not a Cypriot. If I were a Cypriot, I would say to, people who are leaving Israel for reasons of conscience, who are genuinely appalled by the way their government is behaving, who are speaking out against it, I would welcome them. I'd say, by all means, we want people of conscience coming here, within, reason, because we also need to ensure there's adequate and affordable land for our population. But you're welcome here. But if you're a genocidal racist and the only reason you're coming to Israel, whether you're coming from Israel or any other country, you're a genocidal racist and you're just coming there for your own selfish reasons, I'd say, get the hell out. We don't want you here. And I would demand that my government not let these people in.
Then we had this question here from Merkinitos, who says, do you think Iran attack 2.0? Are they just reloading Israel? I'm not sure if he's referring from an attack of Iran onto Israel or Israeli attack on Iran. But I think both would make sense to talk about.
I think the question is about whether Israel is reloading to attack Iran. Anyways, let's assume that's what Merkinitos is asking. I think it's actually quite interesting. How much time has gone by, Rami, since the ceasefire went into effect? What was the date again?
Oh, I cannot remember, but it must have been, a week and a half ago?
It's been at least 10 days, right?
Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting that Israel hasn't done anything since then.
But they've been escalating attacks on Lebanon.
Yes.
In Kfar Kila, which was where we were, as well as there was a drone attack, I believe, in Yahia today.
Oh yes, they've definitely escalated their, insane violence in other parts of West Asia. But as far as I know, they have not attacked Iran in any way, shape, or form. So I think that they are kind of like deer in the headlights, and they are caught between hubris and fear. On the one hand, they're afraid of what Iran might do if they revive the aggression. On the other hand, they are bitterly unhappy about the fact that their war on Iran failed miserably. They didn't they didn't destroy Iran's capacity to enrich uranium. I mean, that's whatever the damage may have been to Natanz and Isfahan and Fordo. Iran clearly retains the capacity and the know-how to enrich uranium. It is very likely preserved. I think it's the hundreds of pounds of 60% enriched uranium. Even though a number of its nuclear scientists were murdered, its knowledge about nuclear energy is institutional. It's not, trapped in the brains of a few Iranian scientists. So they didn't destroy Iran's capacity to enrich uranium. They didn't overthrow the government. They didn't disable Iran's conventional ballistic missile capacity. What did they achieve? Nothing. And every day there are reports coming out about how badly Israel was damaged. In fact, there was a report in the Times of Israel today, which I tweeted about just before we began this program, in which the president of Ben Gurion University said that a single Iranian missile strike will have, quote, far-reaching effects on Israeli science, close quote. So they're probably very concerned about provoking Iran again, but on the other hand, I think they're bitterly unhappy about how little they accomplished in this war. So my guess is they're going to not revive the war by, overt military attacks. They're going to revert to terrorism and, possibly decapitation strikes for which they will not take credit. They'll try to minimize the risk of a retaliatory strike by Iran, but they will not let Iran live in peace.
Sorry, Dimitri, just on a slightly different topic, I've been seeing more and more posts and tweets related to people in the West claiming that that the Iranians have been infiltrating the United States and Canada, and that we should anticipate terror attacks happening here. There was a post today by Poiliev saying that Iranians are going to be fleeing from the United States into Canada and threaten our national security. First of all, I've never really heard of Iranian terrorist attacks happening, right? It's been always Wahhabis funded by the West, right? These terrorists that went to Syria and then come back and then become all radicalized and then start taking the war back home here in the West. I feel like they're manufacturing consent for something. Is it to crack down on Iranians here in North America, or is it to just paint a bad image of Iran so that we could keep this hostility towards them and then get into war with them in the future? I mean, have you been seeing these posts as well, and what do you think of them?
Well, I myself have been targeted by people on social media in Canada telling me to go back to my country, to get out. So, as far as the Iranians living here, and I would say this about Arabs and Muslims generally, Laith Marouf has said on numerous of our interviews that he thinks that their time will come where they're going to round up Muslims and Arabs in Western countries and put them into internment camps, which is what they did to the Japanese in the Second World War. I certainly don't rule out that possibility. The way we're going, I'd be very concerned if I were a Muslim or an Arab living in the West today. But have the Iranians ever posed a significant threat to our security here? No. Can you think of a single incident, Rami, involving a terrorist attack by an Iranian?
I can, but that would be the MEK, which is a Iranian group that was based out of Camp Liberty in Iraq, and now is in Albania. But
they actually they're actually opponents of the Iranian government.
Exactly. So these are the only Iranian terrorist sleeper cells that I could think of.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a very, and we did an interview recently with Sarah Sugai, who is a secular, progressive woman from Iranian Canadian woman from who had been living in Vancouver, and she went back to Iran. she picked up and she left. She's very secular, very modern. If she was walking down the street in Montreal, you'd think she was just like any other Canadian, but she feels much more at home in her country than she feels here now. She said she doesn't identify. It's in the interview, she says it's very competitive. It's very individualistic, the society. She said Iran has a better healthcare system. It's a more peaceful society. I found life here to be brutish and hard, very highly, intensely competitive. And those are the reasons she went back. It wasn't because she wanted to live in a theocracy. That has nothing to do with it. In fact, she, bristles at that sort of thing.
So we have this question here, which says, can a group of lawyers subpoena the UN for all its records dating back to its inception concerning the state of Israel? Isn't real, sorry. And then similarly, Dimitri, in the same line of thought, we had these reports from Kit Clarenberg demonstrating collaboration between the IAEA and Israel. Would there be possibility to gather more evidence through access to information requests to kind of dive into bigger findings?
Yeah, so I mean, whether lawyers could subpoena is going to depend upon the domestic laws of the laws of the jurisdiction in which the subpoena is issued. But I would be very surprised. I don't think you could do that in Canada or the United States. If there are, records that are held internally by an international organization like the United Nations that they don't want to make public, I think a court would be very reluctant in a Western country to force the disclosure of that evidence, of that documentation, for a variety of reasons. One of which might well be that they're concerned that their own government would be highly embarrassed by what would be revealed by the disclosure of the documentation. But no, I think that would be very difficult to do in any jurisdiction, and certainly Canada would be a tough place to pull that off.
And then on a different note here, Dimitri, there was a report, an article on Al Jazeera that was published showing that the pseudo-Shah, right, Pahlavi, might have done a strategic mistake in siding with Israel and encouraging bombing of Iran by Israel, and for calling for an overthrow of the Ayatollah, saying that with all this instability, now is the time to overthrow the Islamic Republic, right, and to take down the Ayatollah. And it seems to have backfired, putting his quest to become the head of state of Iran to take priority over the safety and security of regular Iranians. So it seems that people who were against the Ayatollah are now, and who saw maybe hope in the Shah, are realizing quickly that the Shah doesn't really care for the best interests of Iranians, and that is, truly just an agent of Israel.
Yeah, not the brightest star in the firmament, that offspring of the Shah, is he? You'd think he would have had good sense to sound a little bit nationalistic as the Israeli genocidal regime was attacking his country. Instead, he sided with the aggressor. Wow, amazing. Now, there's a question here I saw. Somebody asked about my views about the Greek government's support for Israel. Before we get to Maria's question, I'm happy to answer that one too, but I just want to comment on that because it is something that just pisses me off to no end. I'm just embarrassed, disgraced, ashamed by the attitude of the Greek government towards Israel. The Greek government, where do I even begin? The Greek government allowed, and this was reported by the Greek and Israeli press, I'm not making this shit up, allowed Israeli warplanes to use Greek airspace to practice bombing runs on Iran. The Greek government is exploiting oil and gas deposits in the Eastern Mediterranean with Israel. They're business partners. The Greek government has allowed Israel's Elbit Systems, the murderous drone maker, to set up a training center at a military airbase just outside Kalamata, where I have a second home. I can see that airbase from my home. The Greek government voted against recently a decision by the EU, one that was supported by a majority of member states, to review the association agreement between Israel and the European Union, which has major economic benefits for Israel. It didn't even want it to be reviewed, okay, let alone canceled or suspended. There was a great interview that Yanis Varoufakis gave a couple of weeks ago, in which he was just expressing his profound sadness as a Greek at what our government has become and how deeply complicit. I think he essentially said, and I certainly have this view, that the blood of Palestinian children lies on the hands of the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. I think the man should be tried at The Hague. I think he belongs in a jail cell, and he should spend the rest of his rotting, putrid life there.
We have this question from Maria, who says, what are your views on Palestine Action? Has UK gone full fascist? So for those who don't know, Palestine Action is a group that does direct action by shutting down Elbit factories. And they've been, I believe 2 days ago, declared to be a terrorist organization or a criminal organization. Dimitri, maybe you have more information on this, by the UK Parliament.
I believe it's a terrorist organization. Yes, that's right. Because they're using nonviolent methods to interfere with the flow of weapons to a state that is committing genocide. Yeah, does that sound like fascism to me, Maria? Oh yeah, that sounds like fascism. So too does interrogating and detaining journalists like Kit Clarenberg. Kit and I discussed this in 2023. He's a British citizen. Okay, the guy comes from Britain, and he went from Belgrade, Serbia, where he currently lives, back to home, and they detained him and interrogated him. This was just before the genocide began. It's gotten worse since then. And he said he doesn't go back to his own country now, and he doesn't go see, he doesn't attend weddings that his friends invite him to. He doesn't go see family members. This is the same country whose High Court just ruled, the United Kingdom's High Court just ruled, that it can't interfere with a decision by the Starmer regime to send essential parts to Israel for its F-35s, which are being used to, slaughter Palestinian children. Declassified UK, just incredibly important, independent and investigative media outlet in the UK, just disclosed that, it's been disclosing since the beginning of the genocide that the United Kingdom is using the Akrotiri military base in Cyprus to send huge amounts of weapons to Israel, to do spy flights over Gaza, to send warplanes to Yemen. Then of course there's the notorious case of Julian Assange. What they did to him was one of the most heinous crimes against journalism of our lifetimes. Basically, the British government psychologically tortured the man because he revealed the crimes of the United States government in Iraq. Is the United Kingdom full-blown fascist? I wouldn't go that far, but on the spectrum, fascism on the spectrum of 1 to 10, 10 being the Third Reich, I'd say they're kind of like at an 8. And the way they're going, they may end up looking very similar to the Third Reich in the not too distant future. I won't step foot in that country.
Now, Dimitri, so, Rob Oz brought up a good point here, is that Palestine Action is not an organization. It does not have any system of membership. At the end of the day, I think they're going to be appealing this ruling. I don't know what's the strategy behind this, but technically anyone could keep doing what Palestine Action is doing, just under a different name. Or, what are your thoughts a bit on the future of direct actions to stop the genocide? Does this ruling, will it interfere with people's abilities to organize and shut down factories?
Well, there is some very oppressive legislation. I think Canada is adopting legislation of this nature. When they're criminalizing with severe penalties interference with industrial operations, even if it's nonviolent. So I've seen legislation being put forward which criminalizes blocking the entrance to an industrial facility. even so, you're not damaging it in any way, shape, or form. You're just impeding people's access to the facility. You go to jail for years under this legislation. Whether people will be able to, if they do, I don't know whether they've actually designated Palestine Action a terrorist entity yet. But whether they do, if they do it or have done it, and whether that will prevent others from engaging in similar action is really going to depend upon the precise terms of the legislation according to which they do this. So if their action against Palestine Action is specifically addressed to that organization, I think you may be able to, just avoid any association with the organization, avoid using its name or its symbols, be able to engage in direct action without running afoul of the anti-terrorism laws in the UK. But again, it depends on the precise language they employ in designating the organization as a terrorist entity.
And I feel like putting in legislation that criminalizes protest at industrial facilities, I feel like this is a huge breach on freedom of speech. And I think you mentioned that this was happening right here in Canada. Is that right, Dimitri?
Yes, I think I saw a report recently about blocking access to industrial legislation about that in Canada. Let me just do a quick check here.
And Dimitri, you could maybe correct me on this, but I feel like that is quite unconstitutional, considering that would be a restriction on freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and the right to protest.
It might be. That would be an interesting debate that we would we lawyers would certainly want to have in a court of law if such legislation was adopted. And whether the court would tolerate it, again, really comes down to the precise language, the scope of the legislation, and whether the language is sufficiently clear and precise to avoid deterring legitimate dissent. So, okay, I can't find it right now. It might not have been Canada, it might have been another Western country. But if that legislation is not already on the books in Canada, I would wager a significant sum of money that before Mark Carney, or Prime Minister Goldman Sachs, as I like to call him, leaves office, legislation like that will have been adopted in Canada.
Yeah, and speaking about Mark Carney, is that on Canada Day, he announced that only Canadians decide the future of Canada. And that same day repealed the digital tax on American companies under pressure by the United States. So
48 hours, that's all it took. Trump says no more trade talks until you repeal the tax.
On Canada Day, by the way, right?
Yeah.
In the same speech where he was praising the sovereignty and strength of the great Canadian people and how we are masters of our own destiny. Anyways. Dimitri, we're at the hour-and-a-half mark. Should we call it a day?
Sure. And want to thank everybody again for joining us. For our comrades in the United States, tomorrow is the 4th of July. Whatever my particular feelings may be for the U.S. government and those who support it, I know that there are, millions upon millions of wonderful people of conscience in the United States, and I wish you a very best 4th of July.
A great time off. That's it. So, folks, it was a pleasure interacting with you guys during this live stream. We spoke about Syrian normalization with Israel, about my comrade in Latvia who got deported for speaking out for Palestine and got secret services on his behind his back. And we also spoke about collaboration between UN agencies and the Zionist entity to legitimize war on Iran. I think it was a pleasure, and make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, follow us on Telegram, X, Instagram, of course, and we will probably be back next week. Talk to you soon, folks. See you.